Well, hello, everybody that's joining us here. If you're joining us live, like as we're actually doing this, then guess what? You are a Time Crafting Trust Premium member, and I thank you for being here to take part in really the first time I've ever done this. I don't know if our guest has done this before, and what you're going to experience today, and by the way, if you're here and you've got questions and things you want to comment on, please let us know in the chat. Sarah, of course, is here as well. Sarah, my trusty operations coordinator. Thanks for being here, Sarah. And she's going to be able to facilitate the chat. If Erik and I, oh, there we go. I just spoiled it. Erik Fisher and I are going to be doing a collaborative. And you all know this. You're in the membership. So you all know it was going to be Erik. I'll bring him in a second. But what I want to say is if you've got any questions or things you want to have added to the show that we can discuss, feel free. Questions will likely happen during this episode. Like I might be able to bring them up on the screen, but there's some weird font thing going on. So if I don't bring your question up on the screen, that's why. But typically, this is going to be a very different kind of episode. First off, this episode is actually for Erik's podcast, Beyond the To-Do List, because he's doing part 1 of Productivity A to Z, or A to Z. And then tomorrow, the next live stream we're doing will be our show, A Productive Conversation, where I take the reins and Erik is kind of where the conversation, we kind of flip the tables, turn the tables. We're not going to flip the tables. It's not a wrestling match. Hi, Ksenia. Thanks for joining us. Jackie, good to see you. Gloria Jean here once again. And Tim is also here, a regular listener of Beyond the To-Do List. See, Erik and I have known each other for a number of years, so it's really cool that we're able to do this. First time that I'm doing this. I'll find out if Erik's done any kind of 2-part episode with somebody else before. But without further ado, I'm going to bring him in. And because this is Erik's show, I'm going to bring him in on the other side.
Okay. No pressure.
Yeah, there we go. Now, I haven't hit record on my Rodecaster Pro yet, so we're still in the preamble part. This is where you get to see what's going on behind the scenes. Now, I will tell you that if you're watching this and it's the recorded version and you're not seeing this live, it means that we've now published the episode. It's now available for you to view. And so now you get to see how the sausage gets made a little bit, like what we do behind the scenes, all that stuff, particularly tomorrow's live stream where I'm going to get Erik to do his intro and all that stuff, but introduce himself like we do with all guests of A Productive Conversation. But this is going to be Erik's thing to run. He loves Sarah loves the Star Wars tee, by the way. I'm wearing another slogan shirt, like my old annual axiom, whatever it takes, no matter what, which was inspired by the Avengers. So we're both geeking out a bit. Your background is definitely more Star Warsy than mine.
We just need some Pixar. We're covering all the Disney IP.
Did you know that today? So today I get to watch Inside Out 2, which I've not seen yet. Have you seen Inside Out 2? Yeah, yes, I know. I wanted to be in the right headspace to watch it. I think like it came out at midnight, and as the night owl, I'd be able to actually watch it. You know, I could have stayed up to watch it, but I wasn't in the right headspace. Instead, go figure, Erik, you know this about me. I watched part 1 of the multi-part documentary on Mr. Vince McMahon on Netflix that also
nice. Of course, yeah. Oh, and I thought this was going to be about wrestling. Come on.
No, it's not. Well, that's it. We haven't really. So I'm going to hand over the reins here in a second. So what we're going to do for those that are here live is we're going to do part 1, which involves the letters A to M, the first 13 letters of the alphabet. Erik will kind of guide us through the process. It'll be, again, I don't look at this as an interview, more as like all my shows are a conversation. I think Erik's the same with you, right?
Yeah. I mean, most of the time, interview show, it's really a conversation. This is just way less formal of a conversation than usual. That's the way I'm seeing it.
There you go. By the way, Janet lives less than an hour from the Orlando theme park, so does that count? If nice. She's like, yeah, absolutely. We know someone in particular who actually does work from one of the Disney parks. David Sparks, Max Sparky, will actually work occasionally from the Star Wars. I think Batu is the name of it. In Anaheim, in California. Yeah. And he's actually, I mean, this is no secret. He's actually shared that on social media, but it's a different kind of, I had not been to the Orlando theme park since I was a really young kid when we would snowbird down there from the Toronto area back when I lived out east growing up. Tim says, that you look nothing like he thought you would. He's also probably shorter than you think he is, or taller. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's nuanced,
5'9",
right?
whatever that ends up being. I think I'm taller than Tom Cruise.
There you go.
That counts for something. So, hey.
That's actually a good point, Bram. The idea of nuanced, right? Like, what does perspective is going to be different. And when we talk about these different letters of productivity over the next couple of live streams, there is going to be, we're not going to get them exactly the way that you would think about them, but it's going to invite some conversation. And Eric and I both have chosen similar things, different things. So it's going to be a real fun conversation. So let's get into it. I'm going to hit record on my side, Eric. That way you have my recording. And once I hit record, it's your show to go with. So without further ado, I can hit record on my Rodecaster, and then I'll just do kind of like a 3, 2, 1, and I'll let you go. Okay, here we go. Record is hit.
All right, let's jump in here. We're covering A to Z of productivity, and of course, it's myself and Mike Vardy. Who else? Yeah, I think we're going to make that. I think I'm calling it now. I think we're going to make this an annual thing, but we'll see how this goes first.
Yeah,
before we make that call.
The question is, will we do letters or every year? Like, will the letters change? That would be interesting to see if our choice. Yeah,
I think that's the premise right there. Is we do A to Z. We do A through M on one of our shows. This is beyond the to-do list this time, and then A through M, and then N through Z. I'll go Canadian for you. On your show this time, but however, I think we'll maybe mix it up next time. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
I'm excited to do this, Eric. So I'm really stoked and we got like 26 letters of the alphabet, a lot of ground to cover over 2 episodes for sure.
So let's move right on in and see how quickly but meaningfully we can cover A through M in this episode. And let's jump right in. You'll get what we're doing if we just go ahead and start. So how we did this actually plays into the first letter, A, and mine that I chose, my word, AI, which is really an acronym for artificial intelligence. We threw it in. We just said, hey, ChatGPT, give me 20 to 30 words for each letter of the alphabet that pertain in some way to the themes of productivity. And it spit it out, and then we threw it in a Google Doc. We kind of trimmed it up and then left a bunch in there still, and then we chose from those, and we each chose different ones for the most part, with some surprises. And so I chose AI because to be able to jump past that blank page quickly has been the thing that I have found. Here we are staring down 2 years of practical mainstream AI at this point, and man, I'm going to love to see where that sits annually from here on out. So what's your take on AI at this point?
Well, it's funny. You that wasn't the word I was initially going to go with, right? Because, my word would have been attention. And attention is still a huge part of it. When I talk about productivity, I mean, for me, productivity, and I think this is the pure definition of it when you get down to its core, is what are your intentions and how do you, kind of marry or link up your attention to it? But truth be told, AI actually can allow you to do that with far more depth. I think you can get to deeper layers of attention, and hear me out for those that are like, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? Well, I mean, the fact that Eric and I were able to kind of do that. And by the way, Eric did it and I did it. Like we both didn't even, we didn't converse and go, how are we going to come up? Like you did it on a spreadsheet. And then I was like, oh, I did the same thing, but he kind of beat me to the punch with the Google Doc. But what was interesting is it wasn't just let's get the first messy draft out of these letters, of these terms, which by the way, was about, would you say 70% spot on of what we were kind of looking for. And then,
I think so.
Yeah, I added some, but they were very nuanced. And that's the thing I think that we might see in the next year which would be very both freaky, but also fantastic in some ways to see, is the application of nuance. But as long as there's that, what does it Nietzsche say? As long as there's no soul in AI, I think that's the part that is going to be missing for the foreseeable future, if not permanently. I mean, you never know, right? I mean, who would have known that we would have been able to, literally do this and then focus our attention on, okay, what word am I going to choose? Oh, I don't have to spend time thinking about this because most of these are right. So, and AI has been rolled out into so many different applications at this point, not just in terms of productivity, but in so many other ways. Writing, so, I mean, recipe creation. I mean, that's where I've used that in practical applications that fall outside of the purview of the field that we talk about regularly. So yeah, AI is at this point, right out of the gate, probably the thing that's going to impact productivity as we know it, and even time management as we know it, for the foreseeable future, and in different ways as time rolls on.
And I think one of the components of that, you mentioned recipes. One of the things that I've heard when it comes to prompt creation or generation or engineering, prompt engineering is literally a role I see out there on LinkedIn. And I heard one of the best descriptors being you're a cook and this is a tool, but you've got to have the right recipe. And we all know that sometimes recipes are secret. So there's still a whole lot of human interaction and creation involved in using the tools of AI, where you've got to season the pan the right way to get the right thing from it. So, and yield results.
Well, and I think the other thing is that, back to my word, which is going to be attention, is you really do have to pay attention to the output, because not only is it, because you're going to get, you're going to get okay results right now. Recipes would be a great example. Like, it will make you an okay steak dinner, but the flavors that the human adds to the equation, I think, elevate it, right? So by using AI as kind of like a springboard, or again, to get those ideas out of your head and in front of you, great way to capture. And as far as I'm concerned, which, by the way, AI has been around for a long time in terms of this regard. So when people are saying, "Oh, if you've been using like GPS, you've been using AI. If you've been using, and the funny thing is that if you use GPS for maps, let's say, and you follow it to the letter, it's going to get you there. But if you're familiar with your city and you're like, well, turning left here, that light is tricky, so I'm going to keep going this way and turn right. That's the human can only apply that, at this point in time. So what I like about where we're at right now in particular is that it allows, when thoughtfully kind of used, it allows the human to kind of harness their attention on things that we can only harness our attention on, which will ultimately level up the quality of whatever we do. And that to me is huge in the world of productivity, because I believe it's long kind of had a slant towards quantity over quality. And I think this can help us get that balance.
Yes, and you just reminded me that I have a screenshot on my phone that I need to remember for an upcoming letter. So speaking of which, upcoming letters, let's move on. So that's A. B, I'm going to let you start. What was your B word?
Well, I was going to go with balance initially, but I think that, again, balance will kind of permeate through all the letters that we choose. I chose boundaries. And the reason I chose boundaries, and again, when I look at these words, I don't necessarily look at them from a technical standpoint, because we could have chosen like apps. We could have chosen apps for the letter A. I mean, because we could have done that. But boundaries to me are the safeguards for your attention, for your tasks, for your time. Being able to establish boundaries, respect them, not only, asking others to do that, but respecting them yourselves, will allow you to be more productive. And I chose that letter because I think a lot of people will lean towards words like balance, or, bullet journaling was one that came up. And yeah, the bullet journal is a phenomenal tool, and it actually allows you to harness your attention in a different way because it's on paper, it's analog, right? But I think that if we start to think about boundaries of time, space, attention, those things that really allow us to deliver quality output and to truly be productive, establishing and then respecting boundaries is a really huge aspect of that probably doesn't get the attention that it deserves.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they think the word boundaries, they think of, what might be a different word coming up later or a variation of it. They think of guardrails. They think of putting something up that's a protection, that's keep me from going too far out, or restrictions, creative restrictions on purpose. That's what they think.
Yeah, also. Constraints. Yeah,
constraints. That's a better way to put it. Yes. Yep. So that you it's like if I had just said, give me 20 words, remember when we were in the last letter, give me 20 words that have to do with, if we don't put the parameters of have to do with productivity, or if I'd added even a little bit more modern productivity, which isn't really as much restrictive, but it starts to narrow it down, or personal productivity would have been an even better way to put it, or that affects everyday life. You see how adding these nuances, and it goes back to my recipe thing from last time, adding in those constraints. But if you flip it, think of boundaries in terms of, it actually goes with your word too, a word, attention. You put those boundaries up, those blinders. It's like, okay, I'm doing this for right now. Sorry, other thing that popped up in my head. I'll write you down and move you away on an analog piece of paper, but I'm doing this right now. So,
yeah. What's your word? Because I think boundaries plays a role into your word as well.
It does. And it's funny because people talk so much about the word batching. or batch processing, doing one thing and being in that zone, or being focused, all other buzzwords. And for me, batching is you are doing a single task and you are doing many of that single task all at once. This is kind of like your themed days, where today is recording day, or today is writing day, or today is and because it froze on me. I froze. Can you still hear me?
I'm back. I got a bit of a hiccup there. We're back.
Yeah, so did I. Okay, I'll start where I left off. One of the downsides that people don't think about when it comes to batching is, what if you don't have the endurance or strength to do a whole lot of that one thing all on, even in 1 hour, 1 day, one half day, whatever? Like, maybe like me, you have ADHD and you need to say, well, in the morning, I'm best at doing this thing, and then before lunch, I can switch over to this thing. And if you just kind of have that rotating, in other words, flow state, deep work, focus, all these buzzwords, like, you've got to do this, you have to do this, it's imperative, you must. That's great, but you also need to know for how long you can do that, and or work out other frameworks to do that with.
Right. Well, batching takes into account task first, time second, really. So in other words, and I think it's the closest we can get to multitasking, right? Because what you're doing is you're saying, I want to move multiple things forward that fall into this kind of contextual element, right? Like, what are all my writing tasks? What are all my low energy tasks, right? Which we, I bring up in time crafting with attention paths and like you mentioned, time theming and all that stuff. And what's great about that is, to your point, it allows you to get into flow. And then if you're paying attention to it, you're like, okay, well, this is either I'm out of gas or I don't have anything else that fits into this batch. It's just another lens with which to look through your work, your days, whatever. And it reduces some of the friction that you might face if you're working simply sequentially on your to-do list or by project or whatever. It allows you to kind of be, again, you move multiple things forward, which is really what we want to do. But by batching it, which is a simple practice, it allows you to do it with very little overhead and bandwidth that you need to set up or anything like that. So yeah, I love that word.
I think of it as washing the dishes. I think of it as, you can sit there and hand wash every single dish, and use the 2-minute rule. If it's going to take less than 2 minutes, go ahead and do that thing right then, and then dry it and set it aside, and you're done. However, it takes even less than 2 minutes to properly put it in the dishwasher, that when that's full, you're not even touching it, and it's batch processing the dishes.
Yeah, absolutely. We got C next, don't we?
Yes, let's move on to C. So let's see. You went first last time, so I'll go with mine. I'm going with consistency. This is one that I think, consistency, that's a value. That's a thing we should have. Here's the thing. I saw this actually this morning and thought of it instantly. It's a social post that Tom Webster shared. And basically, and I'm not going to shame this person that it was a clip and he posted it and then he made a comment on it. This person says, I ship content every day at 7 a.m. It doesn't get published because it's ready, it's perfect, it's finally finished, it's the best thing I've ever written, or I've beaten imposter syndrome. It gets published because it's 7 a.m. Do you see the lesson? And I said, yeah, I see the lesson. You're putting out crap every day because you've committed to putting out something every day, dude. And that was Tom Webster's point as well, is like, consistency is great, but you have to choose which things you want to be consistent with and at what frequency.
Right.
And once I heard that, I think it was Lauren Vanderkam about a year ago or a year and a half ago, where she said, hey, decide what consistency looks like for you for the week. It doesn't have to be 7 days a week. It can be 5. It can be 4. She gave the example of sitting down and eating dinner with her family and saying, yeah, but some certain nights you already know that's not going to happen. You don't need to feel like a failure about that. You just need to say it's a Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Sunday thing or something.
Yeah. And the chain doesn't have to be daily. I think that's part of the problem with like you pointed this out. Consistency, and this has happened for many years. People believe that consistency has to happen in really short time frames. Like every day I must do this, or every year your birthday shows up. That's consistent. Every year tax season shows up on, well, April 30th in the States, April 15th in the States, 15th. April 30th here in Canada. You can rely on that. So consistency, when used appropriately, allows you to kind of cultivate certainty in a world that's very uncertain. And Tim O'Hare, by the way, as we're live streaming this on my YouTube channel. So one of the members of my premium community is saying, Oliver Burkeman calls this daily-ish, which I really like, because you can add nuance to consistency, which I think is fantastic. Now, you can't add nuance in the same way to my word, which is, you touched on focus, concentration, which is, frankly, we hear about deep work, we hear about focus, we hear about attention, which I alluded to. I've been really thinking and leaning heavily into this, and this isn't in the productivity diet book that I wrote, but, and that, as we're recording this, is due to come out shortly. Concentration to me is the highest form of focus. It is, so to your point about consistency and batching, it allows you to really concentrate on things. I've been thinking about these layers of attention, like noticing, awareness, focus, all that stuff. But concentration is, I'm leaning in hard to either this particular task, this particular project, or this particular type of activity, energy, like whatever that looks like, and I'm going to really concentrate on it, because with a higher level of concentration, ideally you'll get a higher level of result, a higher quality output. So I think consistency and concentration go hand in hand. If you're consistent in the right way, you can truly concentrate on those things that matter to you more regularly and without burning out in the process.
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of which, let's move on to D. I know we need to probably move a little bit faster than we have. I decided to choose the same word or words that you did for D, which is deep work. When Cal came out with this book, Deep Work, it was heralded as the second coming of productivity, and highly overrated at the same time or a while after. And I'm kind of wondering where you land on it then/now.
Well, that's interesting, because I think deep work, the idea of it, and some of the little the nuggets that are peppered throughout that book have stood the test of time. Number one, they're timeless anyways. Those principles are timeless. But number two, I think the hard part about Cal's work for some is it goes deep. It requires concentration to really lean into his book. I mean, he's a strong writer, but again, there's a lot there to unpack. But deep work is a concept that I think is still strong. I think the problem for a lot of people with it is they believe that deep work has to happen in large swaths of time, which is not necessarily true. But much like other terms, which, by the way, just to be clear, inbox zero, I don't know if I chose inbox zero as my I might have, but if I did,
I don't think you did.
Well, that's good, because inbox zero being a concept of if you get your inbox to zero, you've been truly productive, is a misnomer. That term, which Merlin Mann created, has been not just co-opted but corrupted over time, and I think the same thing has happened with deep work.
I agree, and I look back on it again. People think of batching as deep work. Well, it can be, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
And like you said, it's thinking I think some people think of deep work as a task over time kind of equation, where they're taking into account, okay, I've got to go into deep work mode, air quotes, and get there and stay there for 4 hours in order to batch process this certain thing and just, crank it out and be done.
I think the other reason I chose that term is also if we zoom out a bit, all the books around productivity that have kind of come out that show both timeless elements that will stand the test of time, as well as trying to infuse the timely elements to it. We in my community we chose a book for our book club, Hyperfocus, Chris Bailey's Hyperfocus.
Yes.
And the general gist of it was lots of helpful things in there depending on where you're at in your productivity journey, right? And also that book came out 6 years ago. So there's elements of it that now, if you're just coming to it now, are like, well, I knew this. Well, yeah, because it may have come from that book, that it's been out in the world for a while. So what I appreciate about books like Deep Work, Slow Productivity, Building a Second Brain, like all of these books, is they allow you to kind of cherry pick and look at what will work for you, because to your point, and you brought this up earlier, productivity is very personal. So you can kind of cobble together or cultivate ultimately and nurture your own productivity practices. Curate. There you go. And by the way, I think finally another D word, deliberate practice, which Cal Newport brings up in his book, So Good They Can't Ignore You, is a precursor to deep work. And I think that might be where some of the equation, the kind of disconnect shows up, is like, oh, deliberate practice rather requires deep concentration, ergo deep work, ergo when I batch my time or use time blocks, it must be for deep work. And that's just simply not true, as you pointed out.
Yeah, you can have 5 minutes of deep work and block everything out and get it done, as well as you can have it be half hour. You can have it be an hour. You can, in other words, don't get stuck in a definitive or what you think is a definitive definition of deep work.
Yeah. Now, by the way,
let's jump to E.
Yeah, I was going to say, I chose a word that I really was it's a new word to me that I've been really focusing on, largely because as we're recording this, we're going through some household repairs based on an insurance claim. I think I brought this up on so many podcast episodes. People are going to know this story at this point. But my word is expectation, and more importantly, expectation management. I strongly believe that really clear communication and consistent communication, along with managing expectations, if you do that around your to-do list, around the work and the tasks that and the projects you're trying to deliver upon, you're like 2/3 of the way there, if not 3/4 of the way. That's the actual effort and completion of that is almost secondary. I mean, it's obviously the getting you across the finish line, but if you can clearly communicate and then clearly communicate those expectations to others, to yourself, it creates some ease. It allows you to better manage your relationship with time. It allows you to prioritize better. And not only that, you're not leaving anybody in the dark. So I really wanted to go down this path, whereas the word you chose and the term you chose is probably the one that I would have gone with otherwise, simply because I'm a night owl.
Yes. Well, that's a good point. So I chose energy management, which is 2 words, but I could have just said energy, but I just thought, you know what? This kind of goes, as I was going through, I was like, I'm seeing a pattern here of deep work and batching. And, if you don't have the energy, you can't focus, you can't concentrate, you can't pay attention to the thing at hand, that even if you've predetermined at a time when you had more energy and made great decisions then, to follow up with it at a time when you don't have the energy. And so, like, for example, I know that right around this time of day for me, oh boy, did I have to have like a shot of caffeine after I ate lunch before doing this, because I knew I needed to be awake and aware and attentive to do this call.
Yeah.
So that's just, and again, that's one of the baseline, like that's just one thing. And again, it's not really energy so much as it is getting up, getting the blood flowing, and again, using caffeine as a crutch in some ways, but still.
Well, energy lives within time, right? And space, right? And so when someone says to me, because energy is one of the types of attention paths I use, for the simple reason rather, that I am a night owl, and I recognize that, because I'm the opposite, right? Like, I mean, I'm doing this now because I can feed off the energy of the moment, but typically...
Yes.
And the reason I'm doing it in the mornings, I mean, if you've ever presented, and you have, so have I, workshops post-lunch, you really got to work harder unless you're funny and doing comedy stuff. That people are already in that relaxed state. They're not really as engaged as they would be prior to lunch. No one likes to be the first person to go on after lunch if you're at a workshop or at a conference. But I think the thing that really needs to be considered when you're thinking about energy management, the things that live inside that are like intensity, right? Like, is this a high intensity task or a low intensity task? The energy you have will allow you to go, oh, well, this is high intensity, therefore I should have some energy to go into this with. Whereas if it's low intensity, energy may not be as much of a consideration, but it is underused and undervalued as a kind of a guidepost or what have you for your productivity, because we often don't take into account, well, how do I feel right now? Oh, well, I should do these things because I feel that way. We haven't really been trained to kind of trust that will work for us.
Yeah, it's one of those things that just varies wildly from person to person. And so I can give you guidance. I can't tell you what to do per
Yeah,
se.
it's fascinating.
So,
By the way, really quickly, it's fascinating that we can only give we can give guidance on that because it's so nuanced. But when it comes to apps, everyone's like, well, so what's the best app? Like,
right,
same principle. Like,
Yes.
I can steer you in the right direction. So there's a lot more things that when you talk to a productivity expert or someone who's spent a lot of time in this field, which for us, it's both over a decade, right? It puts us in a position where it's like, well, you're the expert. How can we? Because it's so personal. It's so, there's so many different places you could be in, seasons of life you could be in, that to be able to give you that answer in a concrete fashion is tricky. It often won't get you what you want out of the question. It's better to kind of explore and go, hey, try this, do this, look at this as an option, as opposed to just, again, back to expectations. What do you expect, right? That if you can manage expectations, you're putting yourself in a much better position.
Yep. All right, let's move on to F. I'll start. I picked flow state, which again goes with batching, goes with deep work. I sensed this this flow, if you will, happening. For me, flow state's different. Batching is one thing. That's an activity. Deep work is a boxing in of a specific type of work or a time, a place, a task, whatever. Flow state is kind of an execution partner in a sense because you can be in deep work and you can be batching, but you can not be in flow state, which would make it harder. Or you can be in flow state, not in deep work, or flow state, not batching. So it's a component, but it doesn't have to be there. For me, I think the best definition that I've heard is you get so into doing something that you lose track of time in a good way. It maybe feels like it takes less time to do it, and or hours pass and you've gotten so much done. It's just a matter of, and again, this also relates to what we were just talking about with energy. I think kind of matching, it's a Venn diagram of like task, maybe, energy for sure, and time designation. And it's kind of a chemistry or an alchemy between those things. Maybe more elements too. I don't know. What's your take?
I think that the time that takes a back seat when we're in the flow state is chronological time. I think Kairos time, like the moments time, and like the other harder to reach elements of time, even though we live in them, we don't recognize it because we're so hell bent on chronological time, because it's objective. Because you and I can say, hey, we're going to meet here at 10 a.m. and that's how the world works. It's how we kind of are able to make our way through the world with any kind of collaboration and cooperation. It's how think about the way the trains used to be, right? Like there was 50 some odd time zones before trains showed up, right? In the US alone, right? So we kind of had to create some kind of order, and chronological time does that. Flow state kind of circumvents that, goes take a back seat. It's like, I guess it's, for me, it's the heightened version of your relationship with time. It feels like you're on a date with time, and time is just flying by and you're enjoying yourself, or you're immersed in it, whether it's enjoyment or not. So flow state, and you're right, flow state can happen when you're loving something or when you're not. And my word actually kind of can help you get there, right? But it can also help you with so many other elements. And we already use this just like we use chronological time in its frameworks. Chronological time is a framework. The calendar is a grid. Getting things done is a framework. Building a second brain is a framework. Time crafting is a framework. And the reason I chose framework as opposed to system or method or whatever is that those things tend to downplay the nuances of what you bring to the table, right? So a framework, what it does is it allows you to kind of work within time and within space in a way that actually can serve you to move things forward, both personally and professionally. They foster freedom. And there's a resistance sometimes to being in a framework because it's too rigid, it's too this, it's too... Well, in most cases, you can decide how rigid you want it to be. And once you do something long enough, rigidity kind of goes out the window. If you exercise every day, which we go back to the whole idea of consistency, is that rigid? Not to you necessarily, but to somebody else? Sure. So frameworks, when applied the right way, and again, they have to be nurtured and fostered over time, they allow you to be more free with the work that you do, with the way you live. And then it allows you to actually truly enjoy life instead of just processing it. And by the way, it also allows you to be spontaneous because you've got something that you can trust, which is this framework. So it sounds counterintuitive, but frameworks is probably the most practical of the ones I chose because it is there and it's what people are often looking for. But again, what framework should I choose, Mike? I don't know. Let's talk about it and figure out which one maybe you take a bit from this one, a bit from this one, a bit from this one. That to me is again, gets you closer to the essence of what being productive truly is.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, you said frameworks, and I think scaffolding,
Sure.
but I think maybe more sturdy than that, or interchangeable. I think maybe Legos too, but it's like, or a calendar. I mean, that's a framework that
Mm-hmm.
lays over chronological time,
Yep.
and it allows you to then swap things in and out. You got to think of it as flexible though. So, let's see. Let's go to G. So earlier I referenced guardrails, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw that in here. And for me, this is more of a cautionary thing than what was the other one? Boundaries. Boundaries is kind of, for me, guardrail is, I think, the metal thing that keeps you from going off the cliff. So
it's the gutters. It protects the gutters while you're bowling, right? Like that's in some ways, right? You know what I mean? I looked at that word that you chose and I'm like, guardrails and boundaries are very, very similar. The difference is, I wonder if you think this, but the difference is that eventually, like, the guardrails should get to the point where you don't need them as much anymore because you've established them, right? Like they are almost like they're training wheels, right? They're the rails that go up. At least that's how I interpret it, but how do you interpret it?
I look at boundaries as another version of a B word, buffer, or buffer zone, or whatever you want to call it. It is it's you. Once you hit it, it slows you down. This is your last. Like guardrails are in place that if you hit them, you're basically almost you're at the last level before you're burnt out.
Gotcha.
Or you're over the rail. So it's there's a buffer between the. Let's look at it this way: you're on the road, the grass. And the speed, what's the skid? What is it called? Where it grinds if you hit. Oh,
the shoulder.
The shoulder, yeah. So the shoulder is kind of the buffer. The guardrail is your last attempt, and then you're burnt out. You're over the edge.
Yeah. So, I like that. It requires you to pause and slow down, like or just outright stop. You're probably at reaction phase with guardrails as opposed to responsiveness when you're with boundaries.
Yes.
Like it's the last. I chose getting things done to dovetail off of frameworks. And the reason is, I mean, simply put, it is probably and if you listen to Cal Newport's podcast, Deep Questions, there's a whole episode 299 is where he talks about like the history of productivity, and getting things done is kind of like a watershed moment for a lot of people in this space. And it's been around for a long time, so much so that David's revised it to soften it a bit as he's gotten older and semi-retired and stuff. And, they've got the team book now, which is about getting things done with teams. So it's a framework that I think often, number one, people get really ardent and cultish about it, where that can be a problem. But I think it's misunderstood because there are elements of it that are flexible. If you've ever heard me talk to David, or even you talk to David, I mean, people go in going, oh, it's so rigid, so this. He goes, well, no, like, David's just like, no, you just do this. Oh, you just do that. And it's because he's operated that way for so long. But if you've lived in this space for a long time, you recognize, he's right. So getting things done, I think, is a big, it kind of opened the doors. There wouldn't be no building a second brain, I think, without getting things done. I think the PKM movement, I think a lot of these were born from that. So I thought it was just natural to pay homage to the person who basically coined the term stress-free productivity, with the idea that if you do this long enough, stress does dissipate. I think it was worthwhile to put that in there, because David he really did bring us to the table in a lot of ways. At least me, I'm speaking for myself. For me, he brought me to the table. So.
It was one of the first things that I remember thinking, wait, productivity as a thing exists? Like, before that, it was kind of time management as a catch-all for all of this stuff. But it's so inadequate. And you think about it, there's so many things so many words we've pulled from getting things done, like horizons or brain dump or capturing. And that I'll stop there because we have so many other words that we need to cover here in this conversation. Let's go to H. So you chose habits.
Yes. And again, I think that when we talk about habits, there's so many books out there about habits. James Clear's Atomic Habits you hear about first, but there's BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits. There's The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Habits are the building blocks of routines. Routines are ways to create boundaries. Like, I think these all go hand in hand. I think that the tricky part about habits, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this really quickly as we make our way through, is Habits aren't something to me that you want to check off a to-do list necessarily, because they are those things that you want to be able to be consistent with. You've heard the term keystone habits before. I know you have. I'm sure others have. I think to me, it's those things that you want to have stand the test of time as you make your way through life. Again, like I want to make sure that flossing is a habit, or let's see, a reading as a habit. So I think, and by the way, there are bad habits and good habits, obviously, but I think habits and habit formation can aid in your, for lack of a better term, pursuit to be more productive. And I think it's a term that you want to kind of pay attention to and lean into, especially for those things that truly matter, that will get you to where you want to go and help you be who you want to be.
I think of habits as intentional consistency, going back to that C word from earlier. Mm-hmm. And so you've chosen, I mean, we all have them. We have unintentional too. Yeah. But we want to cultivate intentional habits, because that's what gets us where we want to get to. It changes the rudder, in other words.
Yep. And so, you chose one that I can't wait to hear your take on this, because I have certain thoughts about this word, but go ahead.
So I chose the word hustle. And there are so many people out there who hate the word productivity because of this word. They say, oh, hustle bros, productivity, whatever. I'm just like, true. But if you think of the real meaning of the word hustle, where it's a sprint in a specific direction, like you're getting attacked, you're hustling, you are running. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem with hustle is that it's been attached to, oh, I get up and I'm hustling all day, every day. It's like, no, it's a gear. It's a gear, it's a mode, and that's all it is. If I want to crank and have, like, you, in a sense, you've hustled by recording so many episodes of your podcast ahead of time.
Right.
And now you've got that buffer there, those boundaries, that margin, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. You've got that there for you. So hustle can be good. Like if I know suddenly something in my triage moment and I realize, oh, this needs to be done now and everything else needs to be moved out of the way, and this is my new morning.
Yep.
I am now hustling on that thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you think about hustling, and other people think of it as a dance, they're like, the hustle's a dance, or it's a cheating of some of the other meanings.
Well,
like,
you're
hustling a person.
Yeah, I was gonna say the good verb. You want the good verb of hustling, not the I'm tricking someone, or I'm tricking myself, or using it as an adjective. Like once it starts, it's a word, and there's so many of them. I was talking to Leo Babauta about this on one of my recent episodes. It was a flashback episode from like a 14-year ago podcast, and we revisited it. And the term Zen was one that like just got like, it got, again, like inbox zero. Like if it gets in the wrong hands and it gets perpetrated in the wrong hands, it can become a word that has toxic elements to it. I don't think the term hustle has quite gotten I think because that's happened, the way that you've defined it gets lost in the shuffle. So I'm glad you brought it to the fore here, because there's nothing wrong with hustling as long as you've got merit behind it and it's not going to burn you out in the process. Because I can tell you right now, and I don't mind saying this publicly, but my wife and I, she was watching me one time watch a Gary Vee talk, and she goes, how old is that guy? And I'm like, he's younger than me. She goes, he looks like he's in his 50s. Like he looks older. I'm like, yeah, because he's been, quote, hustling. Now, in recent years, to be fair, he has slowed down. He has taken more of and if you've ever seen him speak, he talks about patience and cultivating things. But that's not sexy. That doesn't sell, right? So, I'm glad you kind of shone a spotlight on that word, because there is merit to it.
Tempering of the word hustling or hustle. Yeah. So, all right,
intentionality. I mean, I had, if I was going to skip attention to go with AI, I had to go with the other half of personal productivity, which is intention. And what drives me nuts about when I talk about this, speaking of misunderstanding, is I've had people say, well, so intentions are like, they're grand, they're big. I'm like, an intention at its core is something that you intend to do. Something. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be grand. I intend to, put ointment on my right shoulder today. Okay, well, how am I going to pay attention to that, right? You can have all the intentionality in the world, but without attention, that intention is powerless, right? But by the same token, and this is where I think why I highlighted this more than attention at this point, you can have all the attention in the world, but if you don't have it intentionally used, then you end up going, where the hell am I? It's directionless, it's aimless. So intention paired with attention is really what leads to being productive. So when you're thinking about these things, and Chris Bailey, who I alluded to earlier with hyperfocus, intention comes up a lot in that book. And I think that if we think about intentions in that regard, not just as big, grand gestures, but also small tasks, and we marry them with our attention, that's the key to becoming more productive.
So I am going to drop Merlin a little bit here and just say I chose in boxes because one of the conversations that I had with him, I called it was the second time he was on the show. I called it in boxes 0. And we talked about all the, not just the one, the email inbox, but it's like you've got all these other ones. Now, I think we've kind of moved beyond that, I think. But only to a certain extent. It used to be that we would, we all have our preferences now. Yeah. In other words, we have texting, we have phone calls. People still phone call?
Sometimes.
Anyway,
not email. Not anyone younger than us. Anyway.
All the direct message options in all the
Snaps.
Social networks. Yeah. But it came up in my mind because I'm in a group and a number of us were like, I don't really use WhatsApp for anything else other than this group.
Yep.
And I said, well, let's put a poll out there and ask, because I'd love to just move us over into a Slack channel instance, because we then all these different channels and we can use that better and whatever. But then all the people that weren't there in the group that day joined the poll and all said that, oh no, I use WhatsApp for this, this, and this. I hardly ever use, and it's like, okay, well then we're at a standstill and we're just not going to change it. But
well, I was going to say, so Snapchat's a good example. I don't use Snapchat for anything except keeping in touch with my daughter, because that's how she communicates. So here's the great thing about this is where I think inboxes is interesting, because I don't care how many inboxes you have. You just have to have a way to pay attention to them, right? So I don't care if you are in that group and you're like, okay, well, everyone else I only use WhatsApp for this. Therefore, I know that that's what WhatsApp is for.
That
what
helps, it is. Yes.
Right?
Yep.
I won't. So I think that, again, the problem with inbox 0 is that you forego the nuance, the importance of what those inboxes mean just to get them empty. As opposed, and we know Merlin didn't mean that by the term, and we could probably link. You could probably link to in the show notes. Like, here's what Merlin meant by inbox 0. So I think inboxes is a place where we get stuck. It's where a lot of friction occurs, but we tend to overthink it. Like, if we can, because when you're dealing with other people, immediately you're going to have more inboxes. There's no way around it. So How do you harness your attention towards those inboxes in a way that's going to allow you to actually deal with them in a responsible and productive way?
Yeah, it's, again, I always talk about Venn diagrams, but to me, communication is, what are your preferences? That's your circle. What are my preferences? That's the other circle. All right, fine. What's the meeting in the middle? There you go. So,
yeah. By the way, real quick, before we move on, I want to share something that someone said, which I think is a great point about intentionality, and I know we're making our way through. Tim, who is a listener of Beyond the To-Do List and also a member of my community, says, operating without intention is like traveling without a map. You might visit somewhere interesting, but it probably won't be where you need or want to go. I'm like, yeah, and that's where distractions and all that stuff come in, which we did not use for our D, because there's lots of other D words that we could use. I mean, there's so many. That's the thing. There's nuance to this alphabet as well. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up because I think that's that's an apt way of looking at it as well.
Yeah. All right, Jay, I chose journey, which I'm meaning here as progress tracking, basically knowing where you're at. It's funny because I've been looking at a lot of old photos. I've been undergoing a process of, hey, I have tons of photos that are on my phone that, yes, I've backed up, but they're not in my true photo library on my computer. And I'm just one person with a phone. There's also my daughter and my wife who have 2-3 years plus now of post-pandemic photos that we have not, gotten in here. And so I've been looking through photos and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like my son has grown like a foot and a half in the past year and a half, 2 years now. And it's freaky. And his journey, but you don't notice these things unless you're looking at them fairly frequently, which ties into your word.
I'm just going to say, We both, the first 5 letters of our words are the same. Journaling is mine. And I mean, there is no question. So to me, that happens through journaling. Like, I will add photos to my journal entries regularly. I use an app called Reflection for this, but there are others out there. Day One, even Apple now has a journaling app built in, because journaling is actually catching on more and more. I think that post-COVID, specifically post-pandemic, wellness stuff, meditation, things of that nature, reflective practices are starting to gain more traction. And journaling, I mean, the fact that yes, Android's had it incorporated for a while, but as they do with many things, but Apple incorporating it and removing some of the friction to keeping a journal, which is a form of progress tracking, obviously, has been huge. I mean, we have talked about journaling ad nauseum before, so we don't need to go too deeply into it. But to me, that aspect of qualitative, the story, which is what a journal is, and quantitative tracking, which is what you're talking about, can happen inside of a journal. And it's an incredibly underused and undervalued productivity tool that I highly encourage. If you're going to take any of these things that we've talked about so far today, and you're like, well, where do I start? If you start keeping a journal, like, you're going to get closer to where you want to go. And the more you keep that practice up, which, like a habit, it's not a box you check off necessarily. You're going to find that the choices you make, the patterns you see, all of those things will help you become more productive.
Yeah. And that's even just one aspect of it, looking backwards to see what you've written in the past. It's not even about the self-expression benefits or the clarity of thought or, the actual mental, emotional, even processing that is part of that. But deep dive, we'll include a link to an episode. So
yeah, for sure.
All right. Kay. So you chose Kaizen. Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I
Which
chose that.
Ties into journaling and what we were just talking about.
Exactly.
Really.
Well, I chose that for a number of reasons. Number one, again, going back to this idea of slowing down, being more responsive. I chose it because a lot of the Eastern philosophies, a lot of philosophies that come from outside of North America or the Western world, I think are becoming more accepted as productivity practices. And we're seeing that in a number of ways, not just Kaizen, although I'm using that as an example, but Ikigai has come up quite a few times. The Stoicism, that is an aid towards becoming more productive. There are elements of that. So why I brought that up is that, again, these are lifelong practices. These are lifestyles. And so when you look at practices like Kaizen, when you look at practices like, again, the idea of what's the Swiss one, which I'm losing my track of right now.
Heige?
Yeah. Hygge, I think, or Hygge.
Yes.
Hygge.
Yes.
Someone's going to correct us on that. But that's, so when I chose that, I was like, this makes sense because to me, it gets closer to this, productiveness that I would rather see us go down than productivity. And what I mean by that is productiveness, the suffix ness is a state, the state of being productive. Whereas productivity is often associated with activity and quantity, as opposed to, there's an imbalance between quantity and quality. And I think some of these other practices, Kaizen included, allow for more of a balance between quality and quantity without forsaking it. And it's also incremental. The idea of the 7-minute abs or high intensity exercise is what we have here, but over there it's like, just lift heavy things and go for walks and eat healthy and, do what they do in the blue zones. And that's going to put you in a better state as well. So I wanted to draw attention to those philosophies and those approaches, and Kaizen is just one of them. Yeah.
Okay. So I chose knowledge management, and that's a phrase, not a word, but still I can just go with knowledge, but still, again, it goes into this. If you can't tell, I've been digging into my backup external terabyte hard drives, looking for photos and discovering other things too. And I'm like, oh my gosh, one, it's not organized. And two, there's so much on here that is just taking up terabytes of space that, like, there's a couple gig video file of a thing that, like, I'm already done with it. I don't need it anymore. So, anyway, it hit me and I was like, you know what? Better hygiene practices for my knowledge management and my backup systems. It's great that I've got the stuff, but knowing when to let go, but also knowing, why I'm even keeping some of the stuff. There's just been so many times I've just selected every document in my documents folder on my Mac and then just had it plugged in and moved it over and just said, keep all when it says this will replace this. Nope, just keep all, apply to all and keep all. Now it's all there. So I have more space right here in front of me. It's the swiping of everything off the desk, but it's all over the floor. You still got to pick it up. So
knowledge management
working that in.
Yeah, but knowledge management is not it's time and space management. It's both.
Yes.
So that's why PKM, or personal knowledge management, has really taken off, because to me it's like it is the evolution to some degree of what getting things done has done, but it goes beyond tasks. It kind of dives more into the reference material stuff. Tiago's book, Building a Second Brain, has covered this, as has the work that Nick Milo's done in Linking Your Thinking. There's Anne Lore over at Nest Labs also. Like, there's lots of this. So I think that this is, for those of us that have been in the game for a while, this is kind of where things are going. And it tethers back to, like, the first letter, AI. AI done properly will help us manage our personal knowledge management. And I think there's elements. I think if we revisit this a year from now, it'll either show up again as your letter K, or it'll be the letter P that you go and you'll just add the personal part to it. But it's definitely there. It's definitely there. You can't. I mean, it's in the zeitgeist right now.
It is. So that is K. So we've got L and we've got M.
L for
what's
me.
Your L?
Yeah, lists. I mean, again, goes back to getting things done. I'm trying to be a bit more practical and pragmatic with this particular, although there's lots of things like lateral thinking was one that came up. Leverage, like leveraging. I almost went with lenses but that's more to the time crafting piece, where you look through your to-do list through different lenses. I think that's the key, is why I said lists. And this is what spit it out, was lists, not list. It wasn't to-do list. It was lists. We are managing lists that can contain knowledge, like reference material, ideas, tasks, learning how to manage those, because once you start managing those, it'll help you center your attention and help cultivate those intentions that you have. To me, if you start to learn how to manipulate and maneuver around your lists, again, looking at them through different lenses, not just sequential, not just by due date, but by, hey, what are my low energy tasks here? Oh, here's what that list is. I mean, we have that going on, and it's been, ad infinitum when it comes to where the role they play in productivity. Yeah. I will say, though, that if you do your research and you want to know what is the older thing that we should be managing, that's been around longer productivity-wise, lists or journaling. Journaling has been around longer. And often you'll find lists within your journal. So don't discount that as a source for getting that list or adding things to your list, because your journal entries will often tell you that, not only tell you the individual ones, but the ones that show up again and again and again. So lists was the one I went with.
Yeah. I chose leverage. This has always been one of my favorite words. The lever and fulcrum is what I think of instantly, where it's like, just by making that tiny adjustment. And I know we all we can get caught up in, I just want to tweak it. I just want to tweak it a little more and a little more and a little, but this is one where if you are aware of things and you are noticing that you can get a whole lot more lift from just a tiny little course correction or tiny little incremental correction on something, you can just push and you don't even have to push. It's less effort for more output. Why not? It's one of those things. And again, that's one of those things where it's like, well, I wake up and I do a cold plunge and I this and then I that. And it's like, come on now. This is as simple as it is. Notice the places in your life where just moving the lever a little bit to one side or the other of the fulcrum is going to yield less energy needed for more output. Think of it just that simply.
Yeah, agreed. By the way, really quickly, a lot of people talking about PKM and knowledge management in the chat here on the YouTube view. So it's clearly a hot topic, and it's something that I think it'll be interesting to see a year from now, if we talk about this, like what the landscape looks like then, because could we have the same thing that happened with all those productivity practices and apps and things like that, where we see that, oh my God, I'm so tired of talking about that stuff. Not just us, but like the internet in general. I wouldn't be surprised if people burn out on that process as well. I'm even seeing some comments like, it takes so much time and so on and so forth. Heard the same thing about getting things done back in the day too. Oh my God, the weekly review takes forever, or sorting my lists take forever, right? So we could see that turning.
The work.
Yep, and we could see that coming around again, if not sooner rather than later when it comes to knowledge management and PKM and overall. We're in the last one, Eric. We're in the last last letter, which this is my favorite letter, honestly. Like if I have to think about the letter M,
I wonder why.
I mean, I could have chosen Mike Vardy as my as my term and use that as like all of the paragons of productivity out there, be it, Cal Newport, Chris Bailey, Erik Fisher, but instead I chose multitasking and in brackets or avoiding it. Why I chose that word isn't necessarily why one would think. Just the same thing along with Kaizen is the absolutism that we hear when it comes to things that are shared in the productivity world. Like you shouldn't multitask. You shouldn't answer email first thing in the morning. These absolutes, no, people shut off as soon as they hear those, depending on where they're at, right? And we've heard, I don't know how many times people have heard, like, there's no such thing as multitasking. Science shows, et cetera, et cetera. True, in the true core sense, you're right. But you mentioned like washing dishes and listening to a podcast, that's multitasking technically. Now, what I would say is your effort across those tasks is minimized and gets even worse the more you try to be able to kind of hold them all in one space at one time. Effort, attention, all those softer skills, those qualitative elements are diminished the more things you try to do at once. But what I try to do here, and this is again a jargony thing, is I'll say, well, instead of multitasking, why do you tandem task? Oh, really? Like what's tandem task? Well, washing the dishes and listening to a podcast. You're kind of doing this. That's two things at once. So it's more about that choice of that term is more about being less absolute about all this stuff, because I think that a lot of that absolutism shows up not just in our world of productivity and time management, but in so many other places in society as well. And I think that you can't say to someone, never multitask, or you shouldn't multitask. Instead, you should try to figure out how they could, understand that what multitasking does this, and here's something you should try instead, without, kind of going, you're not multitasking, don't multitask. The world doesn't quite work that way. So over the years, I've gotten softer, better, smarter, wiser about that stuff, which, I would hope would happen after spending so much time in this space.
Yeah. For me, it's the tandem task thing is the thing where I was like, yeah, but I very often am walking or doing dishes while
that's a poor example, but there are things.
My
and by
example
the way,
would be you're not answering emails and writing a report at the same time, because both of those require a higher cognitive level than you can give either of them if you're doing them at the same time, pretending it's tandem.
Yeah.
So,
but by the way, AI will also help with this, because you could have AI doing something in the background while you do something in the foreground. Or you could say, I want to do this, and then AI, so AI will essentially become and can be your assistant doing something for you that it can do much faster, better, et cetera, or at least get you started while you do something else. So again, multitasking is again, it's nuanced. So that's why I wanted to point out that the absolute aspect that we tend to go down in so many arenas of productivity is more harmful than helpful.
Yes. So I chose momentum because this kind of ties in with all the other things in terms of focus and batching and being in a place and a time and a task and matching all those things. It's being able to maintain that, or knowing when you're going to have that. It taps into the energy management thing as well. For me, it's you've got to figure out what spurs up your momentum, what keeps your momentum going. And frankly, sometimes it's just a mystery. It's mystical, which could be another M word, and you just don't know. Yeah. But you just play along. You catch the, it's one of those things where, this is an analogy I use a lot, is you want to get somewhere and you're like, well, I have no control, so I'm just going to lay on the raft and let the water take me where it goes. Other people, they flip over and like, it's all up to me, and they paddle and they paddle. Smart people know it's both, and you need to hook a sail up and try to always be catching the wind as you can. But if you can't, you paddle, and sometimes you just lay back and relax. You alternate between those, but it's not always up to you, but you figure out and you tap into the time and the space and the you of it all, and there you go. And speaking of and so what's your thoughts on momentum?
No, I agree. And what I love is that all of the words that we've chosen have kind of had relationships to other words that we've chosen on other letters. And we're going to see that in part 2 of this as well.
It'll happen.
Yeah. So if you won't want to miss that
episode.
Momentum. Yeah. You won't want to miss that episode because this is going to be like a 2.5 hour or 2 hour marathon where you're going to be able to kind of see, okay, well, when they talked about momentum, they also, so again, it just goes to show that all of these terms are interrelated in a lot of ways, but also there's so many terms that we didn't address necessarily, but we wanted to highlight these ones in particular because number one, we've spent so much time in this space, this arena, this field of study that we know that these ones either are related to something much larger that we want to make sure that you understand and address and at least are thoughtful or mindful about, but also may not be as obvious to you. Like, again, AI was pretty obvious, but apps, like, why didn't we choose apps or whatever? Well, again, apps come and go. I guarantee by the time we do this again next year, there will be some apps that are out there right now that are, either gone, acquired by Bending Spoons somehow or something else, right? Like,
I should have chose Evernote for E.
Yeah, no, Nevernote.
That's my point.
Nevernote.
Yes. So there you go. Momentum. I'm looking forward to the other half of the alphabet here. This is gonna be fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward. Eric, this has been awesome. I'm really excited to kind of explore this for part 2, which you'll be able to listen to on A Productive Conversation, which of course you can subscribe to whether your podcast, including this one.
Yes, links in the show notes.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric.
Thanks for being here. I'll see you in part 2.
All right, I stopped the recording on the Roadcaster.
Not bad. We did like a full hour from the point we started, I think.
How did everybody? Tim's X will be interesting. Yes, yes, it will.
But I don't even call it that even now. So I never have.
Thanks to everybody. Now, again, thank you, Kimmy. Amazing conversation. Looking forward to part 2. Yeah, this is when we sat, what did we do, Eric? I think we sat on, it was just a random text that we talked about when we were talking about doing some collaborative stuff with the podcast. And it kind of just came up like, hey, let's do that. So I'm glad we did it. Thanks to everybody for being here. I know we didn't get to too many of your premium member questions kind of stuff because it's Eric's show. So I didn't want to go too much into that. But for the next one, which we'll be recording tomorrow, you'll be able to actually do that. I know you got a jet.
And you'll have the benefit of being able to tie in, what you heard from this. So
Yeah. Well, Eric, I want to make sure that you are able to get on with your day. You're 3 hours ahead, and I know you got some stuff going on. I do as well. So thanks to everybody for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see you.
Awesome. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
Part 2. All right. Take care, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.